He walked into the boardroom like a king, holding his mistress's hand, sure that today would make him a legend. But Caleb didn't know the signature he craved was his death warrant. When I opened the doors, he saw the new CEO wasn't a stranger. It was the wife he left in pajamas that morning. He hadn't sold the company to an outsider. He had sold his soul to the enemy who had slept beside him for 12 years. My name is Juliet Northcott, and to the man sleeping in the king-sized bed across the room, I was nothing more than a piece of furniture that had begun to gather dust. The digital alarm on the bedside table flickered to 6 in the morning. Caleb Sterling did not groan or hit the snooze button. He woke up with the terrifying, robotic precision of a man who believed the world was holding its breath just for him to open his eyes. I stood in the shadow of the doorway, watching him. He was 42 years old, but he spent more money on serums, personal trainers, and bespoke tailoring than most families earned in a decade. He threw the Egyptian cotton sheets aside and moved immediately to the floor-to-ceiling mirror. This was his morning ritual, before he acknowledged the sun rising over the Manhattan skyline, before he checked the stock markets, and certainly before he acknowledged his wife. Caleb had to worship at the altar of his own reflection. He flexed a bicep, turning slightly to catch the light. He was handsome in a generic, manufactured way, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, hair perfectly dark and thick, eyes that always seemed to be calculating the net worth of whoever he was looking at. He was the regional director of Vanguardia Global, a financial firm that sounded important but was actually rotting from the inside out. But Caleb did not see the rot. He only saw the penthouse apartment, the view of Central Park, and the reflection of a titan of industry. I turned away before he could catch me watching him and retreated to the kitchen. If Caleb was a statue of modern corporate power, I was the moss growing quietly at his feet. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in dark, rich potting soil. I was wearing an oversized, faded gray t-shirt that had once belonged to him and a pair of loose linen trousers stained with grass and dirt. My hair was pulled back in a messy, fraying knot to the outside world, and specifically to my husband. I was the eccentric, failing housewife who spent her days whispering to hydrangeas and orchids because she was too simple to understand the complexities of the real world. I was repotting a rare black bat flower on the kitchen island when Caleb marched in. The smell of him announced his arrival before his footsteps did a heavy cloud of sandalwood and aggressive musky cologne that cost $400 a bottle. He was dressed for war. His suit was a charcoal three-piece from Savile Row. The silk tie a deep, blood-red crimson. "Juliet," he said. It wasn't a greeting, it was a noise of disgust. "Must you do that here on the Italian marble?" I didn't look up immediately. I carefully packed the soil around the roots of the flower. "Good morning, Caleb. The greenhouse heater is broken. The orchids were freezing," he scoffed, walking past me to the espresso machine. He moved with a frantic, electric energy today. "Call the repairman. Call 10 of them. Just get this filth out of my sight. Do you have any idea what day it is?" I wiped my dirty hands on a rag, leaving a streak of mud on the fabric. "It is Tuesday." "It is not just Tuesday," he snapped, pressing the button for a double shot of espresso with violent force. "Today is the day. Juliet, the Helix Capital deal closes at noon. The acquisition is finally happening." I watched him lean against the counter, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "Helix Capital," I repeated softly. "The mystery buyers." "They aren't a mystery to me," Caleb lied smoothly. He loved to pretend he had inside information, even when he was flying blind. "They are a massive private equity firm. They see value in Vanguardia. And more importantly, they see value in me. The rumor on the executive floor is that the new owner is looking to clean house, get rid of the old dinosaurs, and put a fresh, aggressive face in the CEO chair." He straightened his tie, smiling at his reflection in the dark window of the oven. "Global CEO. Juliet, do you understand what that means? It means a salary bump of 300%. It means stock options. It means I finally get the respect I deserve." He was hallucinating on his own ego. He truly believed that a mysterious company would spend billions acquiring a financial firm just to promote a man who had spent the last 3 years falsifying quarterly reports. "Caleb," I said, keeping my voice small and hesitant. I reached for a leather-bound ledger sitting on the counter near my gardening shears. "Speaking of money, I was hoping we could talk. I was looking at the household accounts last night, and there are some entries in the ledger that I do not understand. There are transfers to a consulting firm in the Cayman Islands that match the exact dates of your business trips, and—" He spun around, his face twisting into a mask of pure annoyance. It was the look one gave to a dog that had just soiled the carpet. "Not now. Juliet," he hissed. "My God, can you not see I am in the middle of making history? I am about to close the biggest merger in the history of Vanguardia, and you are pestering me about—" "What grocery bills?" "Dry cleaning." "It is not grocery bills. Caleb," I said, taking a step toward him, clutching the ledger. "It is hundreds of thousands of dollars. The numbers do not add up. If we are audited—" "We are not going to be audited," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I handle the finances. I handle the earning. You handle the plants. That is the arrangement. You are too soft for this world. Juliet, you panic over pennies while I am out there making millions." He grabbed his leather briefcase from the chair. He looked at me, standing there in my dirty clothes, holding a book of numbers he thought I was too stupid to read. His eyes softened, not with affection, but with a deep, insulting pity. "Look at you," he sighed, shaking his head. "You look like a peasant. Do not go out today. I do not want anyone to see you and think Caleb Sterling's wife cannot afford a shower." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a platinum credit card. He flicked it at me. It spun through the air and landed with a soft clatter on the countertop, right next to the pile of dirt. "Go buy yourself something," he said, checking his watch, a Patek Philippe that he had bought with funds diverted from the employee pension pot. "Buy some more fertilizer, buy a new shovel. Just stop worrying about the complex things. All right, leave the thinking to the men in the room." He turned on his heel and walked toward the private elevator that opened directly into our foyer. He did not kiss me goodbye. He did not even look back. He was already checking his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, his mind already sitting in the CEO's chair, accepting applause that would never come. "Good luck, Caleb," I whispered. The elevator doors slid shut with a heavy, final thud. I stood there for a count of 10, listening to the whir of the machinery as it carried him down 40 floors to the street. Then, I straightened my spine. The slouch vanished. The look of confusion and meekness evaporated from my eyes, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity that had been waiting behind the mask for years. I walked over to the sink and turned on the tap, scrubbing the soil from my hands with methodical precision. The dirt swirled down the drain, revealing the manicured, strong fingers underneath. I did not need his credit card. I did not need his permission. And I certainly did not need him to explain Helix Capital to me. I dried my hands and walked over to the kitchen island. Picking up my iPad, which was hidden beneath a stack of gardening magazines, I tapped the screen. Bringing up the surveillance interface, Caleb thought he was the hunter. He thought he was a shark swimming in a pool of minnows. He had no idea that he had spent the last decade swimming in the mouth of a leviathan. On the screen, I saw the GPS dot of his phone moving toward the garage. I tapped another icon, opening a mirror of his text messages. I had cloned his phone 6 months ago, the day he changed his passcode and stopped leaving his phone on the table. He had just sent a message. To my little star time. 6:45 in the morning. Message. The old witch is dealt with. I am on my way. Wear the green emerald dress today. Baby. The one with the slit up the thigh. Today is our coronation. You are going to be my queen. I stared at the words, feeling absolutely nothing. No jealousy, no heartbreak. Those emotions had burned out years ago, leaving only a pile of ash and a diamond-hard resolve. Sienna Vance. I swiped to her file, 28 years old, Director of Marketing at Vanguardia Global. Caleb had hired her straight out of a mediocre business school, bypassing 3 other candidates with Ivy League degrees. She was beautiful. I would give her that. She had the kind of sharp, hungry beauty that worked well in magazine spreads and dimly lit cocktail bars. She was ambitious, loud, and possessed the kind of confidence that only comes from being young and having a powerful man pay for your mistakes. She thought she was playing the game. She thought she had seduced a wealthy, powerful executive and secured her future. She called him my king in her texts. She mocked me in their emails, calling me the gardener or the frump. I minimized her file and opened the main dashboard for Helix Capital. The screen was a sea of green numbers and complex logistical data. The acquisition of Vanguardia Global was not a business move I made for profit. It was a demolition project. Caleb was right about one thing: today was a coronation. But he had confused the players. He was driving his Bentley through the morning traffic of Manhattan right now, probably listening to motivational podcasts, imagining the look on the new owner's face when he walked in. He imagined an old billionaire, perhaps a faceless board of directors, who would be charmed by his charisma. I looked down at my gardening clothes. It was time to shed the skin. "Enjoy the drive, Caleb," I said to the empty room, my voice low and steady, "because it is the last time you will ever sit in the driver's seat." I walked out of the kitchen, past the dirty ledger that contained every single lie he had ever told, and headed toward my dressing room. The gardener was taking the day off. The CEO was clocking in. Caleb Sterling believed he was a wolf among sheep. He was about to learn that he was just a stray dog barking at the thunder. Caleb Sterling's Bentley Continental GT slid to the curb outside a luxury high-rise in Tribeca. He did not honk. He simply sent a single emoji, a crown. 30 seconds later, Sienna Vance emerged from the glass doors. She was a vision of calculated desire. The emerald green dress clung to her like a second skin, the slit running dangerously high up her thigh, just as he had requested. She walked with a strut that screamed ownership, her heels clicking a rhythm of arrogance against the pavement. When she slid into the passenger seat, the smell of her perfume, something sweet and predatory, instantly overpowered the scent of the leather interior. "Morning, killer," she purred, leaning over to kiss him. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a claiming. Her hand immediately went to his thigh, squeezing the expensive wool of his trousers. "You look expensive," Caleb said, his eyes devouring her. "Exactly what I need today." "I try," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "Are you ready?" My stomach has been doing flip-flops all morning. This Helix Capital. They're ghosts. Caleb, nobody knows anything. I Googled the CEO again this morning. Nothing. Just a shell company registered in Delaware. Caleb laughed, merging the heavy car back into the chaotic morning traffic with aggressive ease. He cut off a taxi, flashing a smirk at the driver's angry horn. "That is the point, Sienna. That is how the big boys play. They stay in the shadows until it is time to feed, and today, we are feeding them." "But what if they bring their own team?" Sienna asked, her voice tight. She opened the visor mirror to check her lipstick, which was already perfect. "What if they want to clean house? I heard rumors that marketing is the first department on the chopping block in these kinds of mergers." "Relax," Caleb said, reaching over to grip the steering wheel with one hand, the other resting possessively on her knee. "You are not just the marketing director. You are with me, and I am the architect of this entire deal. Do you think Helix would be buying Vanguardia if the stock price hadn't plummeted in the third quarter?" He glanced at her, a wicked glint in his eye. "Who do you think made it plummet?" Sienna stopped checking her reflection. She turned to him, eyes wide. "You, I thought we just had a bad quarter. The logistics issues in Asia." "Manufactured," Caleb said, tapping his temple. "I buried 3 major shipping contracts in a subledger that won't be audited until next fiscal year. I made us look like we were bleeding cash. The stock dropped 40%. Helix swooped in and bought us for pennies on the dollar. And because I facilitated the drop, my finder's fee from the acquisition is going to be 7 figures, hidden in a consulting fee. Of course. Sienna stared at him, a mixture of awe and fear on her face. It was the look Caleb lived for. He wasn't just a businessman to her. He was a magician. A dangerous, brilliant magician. "You are insane," she whispered, a smile slowly spreading across her face. That is brilliant. But is it legal?" "It is gray," Caleb winked. "And gray is where the money is. Helix gets a cheap company, I get the CEO chair and a massive payout. And you, my dear, get to be the queen of the castle. Juliet will be out of the picture by Christmas. I will give her the apartment in Connecticut and a generous alimony, and she will be happy to go back to her flowers. Then, it is just you and me." The car purred as they approached the financial district. The Vanguardia Tower loomed ahead, a monolith of glass and steel piercing the gray sky. "Just you and me," Sienna repeated, her hand sliding higher up his leg. "I like the sound of that." They pulled into the executive garage. The atmosphere changed the moment they stepped out of the car. The underground lot was silent, heavy with dread. Usually, there was a buzz of activity, junior executives rushing to get the best spots. Today, it was a ghost town. They took the private elevator up to the 40th floor. When the doors opened, the silence was even louder. The main floor of Vanguardia was usually a hive of noise phones ringing, traders shouting, printers whirring. Today, it felt like a wake. People were huddled in small groups, whispering. They looked up as Caleb and Sienna walked by. There was no respect in their eyes today, only fear and a simmering resentment. They knew something was happening. They knew the wolves were at the door, and they suspected Caleb was the one who had opened the latch. "Look at them," Caleb muttered to Sienna, not bothering to lower his voice. "Sheep waiting for the slaughter. This is why we need new blood. This place smells of failure." He strode past his assistant's desk without acknowledging her. She looked pale, clutching a box of tissues. "Mr. Sterling," she squeaked. The delegation is already here. They are in the boardroom." "Good," Caleb said, adjusting his cuffs. "Let's not keep Destiny waiting." They reached the waiting area outside the main boardroom. It was a lavish space with plush leather sofas and abstract art that cost more than most employees earned in a lifetime. Sitting on one of the sofas, looking entirely out of place, was an old man. Caleb stopped dead in his tracks. It was Arthur Penhaligon. The man was ancient, at least 70. Dressed in a tweed suit that looked like it smelled of mothballs and old libraries. He was reading a newspaper, a physical newspaper, peering through thick spectacles. Arthur had been the Northcott family lawyer for decades. He was the one who handled Juliet's trust fund, her allowance, as Caleb liked to call it. He was a relic, a boring, dusty old man who usually only called to remind Caleb about tax filings for Juliet's charitable donations. "Arthur," Caleb barked, a laugh of disbelief escaping him. "What on earth are you doing here? Did you get lost on your way to the nursing home?" Arthur lowered the newspaper slowly. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely unbothered by Caleb's tone. He folded the paper meticulously and placed it on the coffee table. "Good morning, Caleb," Arthur said, his voice raspy but clear. "And Miss Vance, lovely dress, very vibrant." Sienna bristled. Sensing the mockery in the old man's politeness, she crossed her arms, trying to look imposing. "I asked you a question." "Arthur," Caleb said, stepping closer, looming over the seated man. "This is a closed corporate merger. Security should not have let you up here. Is Juliet in trouble? Did she forget how to write a check again?" "Juliet is fine," Arthur said. Standing up, he was shorter than Caleb, but there was a strange gravity to him. He didn't shrink away. "I am here on business." "Business?" Caleb scoffed. "What business could a probate lawyer possibly have with $1 billion private equity takeover? Unless— Oh, I get it," he smirked, looking at Sienna. "Juliet sent him. She probably heard the news and wants to make sure her little dividend checks don't stop coming when the company changes hands. Tell her not to worry. Arthur, I will make sure she gets her pocket money. Arthur smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who knew the punchline of a joke that hadn't been told yet. I will be sure to relay that message, Caleb, Arthur said softly. But actually, I am here as legal counsel, for the buyer. Caleb froze for a second, then burst out laughing. You are representing Helix Capital. Don't make me laugh. You handle wills and estates. Arthur, you don't handle hostile takeovers. I have expanded my portfolio, Arthur said simply. He checked his pocket watch. The meeting is starting. Caleb, you really should not keep the chairwoman waiting. She is a stickler for punctuality. Chairwoman, Sienna asked, her voice trembling slightly. It is a woman. We will see, Caleb said, brushing past Arthur. Come on, Sienna. Ignore him. He's probably just here to notarize some papers. Let's go meet the new boss. Caleb pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. He expected to see a team of lawyers, maybe a few aggressive Wall Street types in power suits. He expected to see fear on the faces of the other board members. The room was freezing. The air conditioning was cranked up high. The long mahogany table was occupied by the entire board of directors of Vanguardia. They were all silent, their faces pale, hands clasped tightly in front of them. At the head of the table, the chair's seat was empty. The windows behind the seat showcased the gray, weeping sky of New York City. Gentlemen, Caleb announced, his voice booming. And ladies, he nodded to the few female board members. He pulled out the chair to the right of the head of the table, the seat traditionally reserved for the CEO's second-in-command. He gestured for Sienna to take the seat next to him. You can't sit there, hissed David, the current CFO, his face sweating profusely. That is reserved for the Helix team. I am the Helix team, Caleb whispered back, winking. Just watch and learn, David. He sat down, crossing his legs, feeling the adrenaline pumping through his veins. This was it, the moment he had engineered for 3 years, the moment he would step out of the shadows of mediocrity and claim his throne. Arthur Penhaligon walked into the room quietly and stood by the door. He didn't sit. He just clasped his hands behind his back and waited. Where is she? Caleb asked loudly, checking his watch. It is 10 o'clock. If this new owner wants to start off on the right foot, she better learn that my time is money. The handle of the side door, the private entrance usually reserved for the CEO, turned. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. Caleb straightened his tie, putting on his best winning smile. Sienna smoothed her dress, arching her back to look her best. The door opened, and the air left the room. I stood on the other side of the double mahogany doors, listening to the silence of the corridor. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a vacuum before an explosion. My reflection in the polished brass handle showed a woman I had not let the world see in over a decade. The gardener was gone. The submissive wife was dead. In her place stood the CEO. I adjusted the cuffs of my white bespoke suit. It was cut from Italian silk, sharp enough to draw blood, and tailored to fit me like armor. I had chosen white deliberately, in the sea of gray and black suits that filled the boardroom. I wanted to be a flare of blinding light. I reached up and touched the diamond choker around my neck. It was a vintage Cartier piece, heavy and cold against my skin, worth more than the entire pension fund of the company I was about to dismantle. My head of security, a man the size of a mountain named Elias, nodded to me. He held up 4 fingers, 4 bodyguards, no entourage, no lawyers scrambling with paperwork, just me and the muscle. Open it, I commanded. The door swung open with a heavy, expensive swoosh. I stepped into the room. The air inside was stale with the smell of old money and nervous sweat. The boardroom was magnificent. I had to admit, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the New York skyline, gray and imposing under the morning clouds. But I did not look at the view. I looked at the table. There were 20 people seated around the long slab of black marble. They were the board of directors of Vanguardia Global, men and women who controlled billions of dollars, yet in that moment, they looked like schoolchildren waiting for the principal. And then there was Caleb. He was sitting to the right of the head chair, his legs crossed, a smug smile frozen on his face. And right next to him, in the seat reserved for the vice chairman, was Sienna Vance. The green emerald dress was even more vulgar in the harsh fluorescent light of the boardroom than it had been in the photos I had intercepted. It was a cocktail dress at a funeral. I did not stop walking. I strode forward, my heels striking the marble floor with a rhythmic, echoing clatter. Click, clack, click, clack. It was a sound I had practiced. It was the sound of a gavel coming down. It was the sound of judgment. The room remained deathly silent. No one breathed. As I passed the lower-tier executives, I saw their eyes widen. They did not recognize me. To them, I was just a terrifyingly well-dressed stranger. But as I approached the head of the table, the recognition began to dawn on the man I had married. Caleb's smile faltered. It didn't disappear instantly. It simply cracked, like a windshield hit by a stone. He squinted, his brain trying to reconcile the image of the woman in the white power suit with the woman he had left covered in potting soil 2 hours ago. He blinked once, twice. I reached the head of the table. I did not sit. I placed my crocodile skin folder on the black marble. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the table was like a gunshot. I turned slowly and looked directly at him. Caleb's mouth fell open. It was a comical, grotesque expression. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure that had been left too close to a fire. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the table, began to tremble. "Juliet," he croaked. The name came out as a strangled whisper. "What? What are you doing here?" I stared at him, my face a mask of bored indifference. I did not blink. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Juliet, seriously, are you lost? Did you come to bring me lunch? Security? How did she get in here?" He looked around the room, expecting the guards to rush forward and escort his embarrassing, confused wife away. But the 4 men in black standing behind me did not move. They stared straight ahead, their hands clasped in front of them, radiating a silent threat. Sienna leaned in, her voice a high-pitched hiss of panic that carried clearly in the silent room. "Caleb, who is that? Why is she standing at the head chair?" "It is my wife," Caleb hissed back, his face flushing red with a mix of humiliation and anger. She is not well. She gets confused." He turned back to me, putting on that patronizing voice he used when I forgot to buy his favorite brand of sparkling water. "Honey, listen to me. You are in a very important meeting. This is a restricted area. You need to go back downstairs and wait in the lobby. I will have the driver take you home. You are embarrassing yourself." I tilted my head slightly to the side, studying him. It was fascinating, truly, even with the evidence standing right in front of him, draped in $50,000 of silk and diamonds. His arrogance would not let him see the truth. He could only see the narrative he had written for me, the weak, foolish, dependent wife. I ignored him completely. I reached out and pulled the heavy leather chair at the head of the table. I sat down. The act was simple, but the effect was nuclear. A gasp went around the room. David, the CFO, looked like he was having a cardiac event. "Juliet," Caleb snapped, his voice rising. "Get up. That seat is for the new owner of the company. The CEO of Helix Capital will be walking through those doors any second. And if she sees you sitting there playing dress-up, she will have you arrested." "She is already here, Mr. Sterling," I said. My voice was not the soft, murmuring tone I used at home. It was low, crisp, and projected to the back of the room without effort. Caleb froze. "What?" I looked toward the door where Arthur Penhaligon was standing, my old faithful lawyer, who had been watching the scene with a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. Stepped forward, he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Arthur announced, his voice booming with courtroom authority. "Please rise." The board members, conditioned by decades of corporate hierarchy, scrambled to their feet. Caleb remained standing, but he looked like he was swaying on the deck of a sinking ship. Sienna stayed seated, gripping the edge of the table, her eyes darting between me and Caleb. "It is my distinct honor," Arthur continued, gesturing toward me with a sweep of his hand, "to introduce you to the founder and sole proprietor of Helix Capital, the majority shareholder, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, the new chairwoman and chief executive officer of Vanguardia Global, Ms. Juliet Northcott." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. It wasn't just shock, it was a collective cognitive dissonance. The board members looked from Caleb to me, trying to connect the dots. The wife, the gardener, the owner. Caleb dropped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. He stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant. "Helix," he whispered. "Helix Capital." I smiled then. It was a small, razor-sharp smile. "Yes, Caleb, Helix." I watched the memory hit him. I could see it playing out behind his eyes. 15 years ago, we were in our final year of university. I was working on my thesis for my economics degree, a theoretical model for a private equity firm that utilized algorithmic purchasing to acquire distressed assets. I had called the project the Helix model. Caleb had laughed at it. I remembered the exact moment. We were sitting in the campus coffee shop. He had patted my head and said, "It is cute, babe, but that's not how the real world works. You are too academic. Leave the real finance to the sharks." He had forgotten about it. He had forgotten that I graduated top of my class. He had forgotten that while he was busy networking and drinking at frat parties, I was building code. "You?" Caleb stammered, his voice shaking. "You are Helix, but that is impossible. You garden. You ask me for allowance?" "I ask you for an allowance from the joint account because it made you feel big," I said, opening the crocodile folder. "I did not want to bruise your fragile ego with the reality that my personal tax bill is higher than your entire annual salary." Sienna let out a small, strangled whimper. "Caleb, what is she talking about? You said she was a nobody. You said she lived off your bonus checks." "Shut up," Caleb hissed at her, not looking away from me. "Juliet, this is some kind of sick joke. You bought the company. With what money? You have a trust fund. Sure, but not this kind of money. Vanguardia is worth $2 billion. $2.4 billion, I corrected him calmly. And I did not buy it with a trust fund. I bought it with the liquidity from my other ventures. You see, Caleb, while you were busy trying to become a legend on Wall Street by cooking the books, I was actually building things. Tech startups, biomed patents, silent partnerships. I have been very busy while you were working late." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on top of the file. The diamond ring on my finger, not the wedding band he gave me, but a solitaire I bought for myself, caught the light and flashed directly in his eyes. "But we are not here to discuss my portfolio," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "We are here to discuss yours." I tapped the folder. "I have been reviewing the due diligence reports for the acquisition, and I must say, the level of incompetence and fraud I have discovered is breathtaking. Truly, Caleb, it is almost impressive how stupid you thought I was." Caleb's face turned from white to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the folder. He knew what was in there. He knew exactly what he had hidden in the subledgers. "Now," I said, looking around the room at the terrified board members. "Sit down, all of you. We have a lot of work to do. And Mr. Sterling, do not get too comfortable in that chair. You are sitting in a seat reserved for executives with a future." Caleb swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He looked at the door, calculating the distance, wondering if he could run. But Elias, my head of security, took a subtle step forward, blocking the exit path. There was no escape. The trap had snapped shut. And the woman holding the key was the one he had underestimated every single day for 12 years. "Let us begin," I said. I tapped the touchpad on the sleek console built into the marble table. The blinds on the floor-to-ceiling windows descended with a synchronized hum, cutting off the gray morning light and plunging the room into a manufactured twilight. Simultaneously, the massive 8K screen behind me flickered to life. It did not display a welcome message. It displayed a live feed of the global stock markets, superimposed with Vanguardia's plummeting real-time valuation. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries," I said. My voice was calm, stripped of any emotional inflection. It was the voice I used when I was coding complex algorithms, binary and absolute. "I have spent the last 48 hours analyzing the fiscal architecture of this company. What I found was not just mismanagement, it was a systemic rot disguised as aggressive expansion." I stood up and walked slowly toward the screen. The heels of my shoes sank into the plush carpet, making my movements silent and predatory. "Our EBITDA for the last fiscal year suggests a profit margin of 12%, I continued, gesturing to a graph that spiked upwards in a sharp green line. "However, once you strip away the leveraged buyouts of shell companies in Panama and the capitalized interest on loans that should have been written off as bad debt, the actual margin is negative 8%. I turned back to the room. The board members were frozen. They were not used to hearing the truth. They were used to Caleb's buzzword synergy, paradigm shift, disruption. I was speaking the language of forensic accounting, and it terrified them. "You have been operating on a liquidity runway of less than 3 months, I said, locking eyes with a board member who I knew had just bought a third vacation home. "Technically, Vanguardia is insolvent. The only reason the lights are still on is because I bought your debt. I own the building you are sitting in. I own the servers your emails are stored on. I own the chairs you are sweating in." Caleb could not take it anymore. The cognitive dissonance was tearing him apart. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor, a jagged sound that made everyone flinch. He stood up, adjusting his jacket, trying to summon the ghost of the authority he had possessed only 10 minutes ago. "Juliet, stop it," he said. He tried to sound commanding, but his voice cracked. He put on a strained, indulgent smile, the kind he used when he was trying to get me to sign a document I didn't read. "Okay, point taken. You have had your fun. You learned some big words, but this joke has gone too far. We are in front of the board. We need to go to my office and talk about this privately. You are clearly having some kind of episode." He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out as if to guide a lost child. "Come on, honey. Let's go get you some tea." I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply looked at Elias, my head of security. Elias moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He stepped out of the shadows and placed a hand on Caleb's chest. It wasn't a shove. It was an immovable object meeting a very weak force. He applied pressure, and Caleb stumbled back, his knees hitting the edge of his chair. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Elias rumbled. His voice was deep enough to rattle the water glasses on the table. "Don't touch me," Caleb shouted, his face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to call off the dog. "Juliet, tell him to back off. I am your husband." I walked back to the head of the table and placed my hands on the cool leather of the chair. I leaned forward, bringing my face into the light so he could see every sharp angle, every lack of mercy in my expression. "There is no husband in this room. Mr. Sterling," I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "There are no wives here. There are no marriages. In this boardroom, there are only shareholders and employees. And right now, you are an employee under active investigation for corporate malfeasance. If you speak out of turn again, I will have you removed and placed in a holding cell until the federal authorities arrive. Do I make myself clear?" Caleb stared at me. For the first time, he really saw me. He didn't see the woman who potted orchids. He saw the shark that had eaten him whole. He sank slowly into his chair, his mouth snapping shut. "Good," I said. "Now, let us look at the personnel." I clicked a button on the remote. The screen changed. It was an organizational chart of the C-suite executives. At the top was the CEO position, currently blank. Below it were the faces of the people in this room. "I have marked the individuals who have upheld their fiduciary duties in green," I explained. Those who have engaged in gross negligence, insider trading, or direct theft are marked in red. I pressed the button again. The screen washed with red. It was a bloodbath. Over half the faces were crossed out with thick, aggressive crimson lines. Gasps echoed around the table. People were looking at the screen, then at each other, realizing their secret alliances were not secrets at all. "David," I said, turning my gaze to the chief financial officer. He was a small, sweaty man who had been Caleb's roommate in college. He was currently wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that cost more than my first car. David jumped as if I had tasered him. Northcott, I can explain. The accounting standards allow for certain creative interpretations of. You signed off on a $12 million transfer to a vendor called Omega Logistics last month, I interrupted, my voice boring into him. I checked the corporate registry for Omega Logistics. The registered address is a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, and the registered owner is your brother-in-law. David turned the color of old milk. That is a coincidence. It is a legitimate vendor. It is a shell company that has never shipped a single package, I said. I have the bank records. David, I have the wire transfers. I know that 3 days after Vanguardia paid Omega, your personal mortgage was paid off in full. That is not creative interpretation. That is embezzlement. You are fired. The words hung in the air. Security, I commanded. 2 guards stepped forward. They didn't ask David to move. They simply hooked him under the arms and lifted him out of his chair. You can't do this, David screamed, his legs kicking uselessly as they dragged him toward the door. Caleb, do something. She is crazy, Caleb. Caleb did not look at his friend. He stared at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He was realizing that if the CFO was gone, his shield was gone. The doors slammed shut, cutting off David's screams. The silence that returned was heavy, thick with fear. The remaining board members sat up straighter, terrified that they would be next. Now that the trash has been taken out, I said, smoothing the lapel of my white jacket, we can address the marketing budget. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, until my gaze landed on Sienna Vance. She was trembling. It wasn't a subtle shake. Her entire body was vibrating. The arrogant smirk she had worn in the car was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. She looked at Caleb for help, but Caleb was staring at the table, refusing to acknowledge her existence. I did not feel jealous. I looked at her face, her carefully applied makeup, her trembling lips, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical disappointment. This was the competition. This was the woman Caleb risked everything for. She wasn't a rival. She was a line item. Miss Vance, I said. Sienna flinched. Ms. Northcott? I didn't know. I swear. You are the director of marketing, I said, looking down at the file in front of me. According to your contract, your salary is $200,000 a year, a respectable sum. Yet, looking at your departmental spending, I see a disturbing trend of misallocated funds. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to a scanned copy of a credit card statement. It was magnified so everyone could read the line items. Here we have a charge from 3 days ago, I said, using a laser pointer to circle the entry. $5,000 at the Emerald Boutique on Fifth Avenue. The expense category is listed as Diplomatic Client Entertainment. Can you explain to the board which diplomat requires a size 2 evening gown to facilitate a merger? The room turned to look at Sienna. The men and women of the board, who had previously leered at her or envied her, now looked at her with pure disgust. In the corporate world, sleeping with the boss was a cliché, but stealing from the company to buy clothes was a mortal sin. Sienna's hand flew to her throat, clutching the neckline of the green dress, the dress Caleb had told her to wear. The dress he said would make her a queen. Caleb told me to buy it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He said it was a business expense. He said I needed to look the part. Mr. Sterling does not authorize expenses anymore, I said coldly. I do. and I do not recall authorizing the purchase of personal wardrobe items for junior executives. I walked around the table until I was standing right behind her. I could smell her perfume, the same cloying scent that had lingered on Caleb's suits for months. It smelled like desperation now. "That dress," I said, leaning down so my voice was a whisper near her ear, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, but intimate enough to be terrifying. "It is a beautiful piece of fabric, Miss Vance. The color suits you, but there is a problem. It is company property. It was bought with Vanguardia funds. Technically, you are wearing stolen goods." Sienna began to cry. Silent, ugly tears tracked through her foundation. I will pay it back," she sobbed. "I will write a check." "I do not want your check," I said, straightening up. "I want the company's assets returned. I expect that dress to be laundered and returned to the inventory department by 5 o'clock today. If you are still wearing it when you leave this building, I will have you charged with theft. Do you understand?" "Yes," she choked out. "Yes." "Good. And until then," I said, looking at the plunging neckline and the slit up her thigh with open disdain, "try to cover yourself up. This is a boardroom, not a brothel. You are lowering the property value just by sitting there." I walked back to my seat. I caught Caleb's eye. He was looking at me with a mixture of horror and awe. He was smart enough to realize what I had just done. I hadn't screamed at his mistress. I hadn't made a scene about infidelity. I had reduced their passionate affair to a compliance violation. I had stripped the romance and the thrill away, leaving only the tawdry, cheap reality of embezzlement. He knew then. I could see the realization dawn on him like a slow sunrise over a wasteland. He realized that this wasn't something I had decided to do this morning. He realized I hadn't just stumbled upon the truth. He looked at the files. He looked at the specific dates on the screen. He realized I had been watching him for months, maybe years. He realized that every time he came home late and lied about a client meeting, I knew. Every time he bought Sienna a gift on the company card, I saw the notification. Every time he mocked me for gardening, I was digging his grave. "Juliet," he whispered, and this time, there was no command in his voice, only fear. "How long? How long have you known?" I sat down in the CEO's chair and folded my hands. "Long enough to dig 2 graves. Caleb," I said. "Now, let us discuss the restructuring of your department, or rather, the dissolution of it. Let us discuss Project Ghost," I said, pressing a button on the console. The screen behind me shifted again. Gone were the organizational charts and the humiliating credit card statements. In their place appeared a complex, spiderweb-like diagram. In the center was the logo of Vanguardia Global. Radiating outward were dozens of lines connecting to smaller, obscure nodes with names that sounded legitimate, but were, in reality, completely hollow. Apex Consulting, Blue Horizon Logistics, Sterling Strategic Solutions. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that happens when a magician reveals how the trick is done, and the audience realizes they have been robbed. "You thought you were clever, Caleb," I said, walking slowly along the length of the table. "You created a network of 24 shell companies. You used them to bill Vanguardia for services that were never rendered. Consulting fees, market research, software licensing. You moved money from the corporate accounts into these shells, and then you moved it again, washing it through offshore accounts in Panama and the Caymans, before finally depositing it into your private holdings." Caleb was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man watching a video of his own autopsy. "It is a classic embezzlement scheme," I continued, my voice dripping with clinical boredom. "It is actually quite derivative. I expected more creativity from a man who prides himself on being a visionary. But here's the part you missed. You assumed that because these debts were spread out, no one would notice the aggregate total. You assumed that as long as the company kept making money, the shareholders would not look too closely at the expenses." I stopped in front of him. "But I looked, Caleb, because I own the debt." Caleb blinked. his eyes losing focus. What? What do you mean? Helix Capital did not just buy the equity of Vanguardia this morning, I explained, leaning against the table. For the last 2 years, my firm has been quietly purchasing Vanguardia's distressed debt on the secondary market. Every time you took out a high-interest loan to cover the cash flow gaps caused by your theft, I was the one buying the note, effectively. Caleb, I have been your banker for 24 months. I signaled to Arthur. He handed me a stack of papers. I own your mortgage, I said, tossing a document onto the table in front of him. I own the lien on your car. I tossed another paper. And I own the debt of every single one of these shell companies because you were foolish enough to use corporate guarantees to secure their accounts. I picked up the remote again. Let us look at what you bought with my money. The screen changed to a slideshow of high-definition images. The first image was a photograph of a resort villa stilted over turquoise water. It was paradise. The Maldives, I narrated. Last November, you told me you were in London for a fintech conference. You said the weather was miserable. Yet, here is the invoice from the Royal Island Resort. $25,000 for a 7-night stay in the presidential suite. Charged to research and development. I am curious. Caleb, what exactly were you researching in a private infinity pool with Miss Vance Hydrodynamics? Sienna let out a choked sob. Burying her face in her hands, I clicked the remote. A picture of a sleek, silver Bentley Continental GT appeared. And this? I said. The car you drove here today. You told me you leased it with your bonus, but there was no bonus last year. Was there? The company missed its targets because you were draining the accounts. This car was purchased by Blue Horizon Logistics as a delivery vehicle, a $200,000 delivery vehicle. I suppose that makes sense if you are delivering nothing but lies. I clicked again. An image of a luxury apartment building in the Upper East Side. Apartment 4B, I read from the screen. Leased to Sterling Strategic Solutions as a satellite office, but there are no desks in Apartment 4B. Are there? There is a silk bed. There is a fully stocked wine fridge. It is a love nest. Caleb, you charged the company $6,000 a month to rent a room where you could cheat on your wife. Caleb was shaking his head, a low moan escaping his throat. Juliet, please, stop. The board. They don't need to see this. The board needs to see exactly where their dividends went, I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. You did not just steal from the company. Caleb, you stole from me. He looked up, confusion warring with his fear. I know. You own Helix. I get it. I stole from your company. I will pay it back. I swear. No. You idiot, I said, leaning in close. You still do not understand. You think Vanguardia is just some random firm I acquired? Do you really know nothing about the woman you married? I stood up straight and looked at the board members, who were watching this dismantling with terrified fascination. My maiden name is Northcott, I announced. My grandmother was Eleanor Northcott. Does that name ring a bell? Caleb. Caleb frowned. She was a librarian. You told me she was a librarian. She was a librarian, I agreed. She was also the silent founder of the Northcott Trust, which provided the initial seed funding for Vanguardia Global 40 years ago. When she died, she did not leave me a small allowance to buy potting soil. She left me the controlling interest in the trust that owns the majority of the Class B shares of this company. Caleb looked like he had been struck by lightning. I placed my shares in a blind trust to avoid conflicts of interest because I wanted to build my own career, I said. I let the board run the company. I let you get hired. I let you climb the ladder. I wanted to see if you could succeed on your own merit. I never told you because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I owned. But make no mistake, Caleb, you were not stealing from faceless investors. You were not stealing from the market. You were stealing money directly out of my inheritance. Every bottle of champagne you drank, every dress you bought for your mistress, every flight you took, you paid for it with my grandmother's legacy. The room spun for him. I could see it. The realization that the gardener he had mocked, the wife he had treated as a financial burden, had been his employer the entire time. But that is not all, I continued, twisting the knife. You called me a failed housewife. You told your friends I was quaint. You thought my days were filled with dirt and flowers. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. While you were playing CEO. Caleb, I was building the future. Have you heard of the app, Streamline, the one you use to organize your schedule? He nodded dumbly. I wrote the code for the beta version in our guest bedroom while you were watching football. I am the primary angel investor. It sold to Google last year for $4 billion. His eyes bulged. How about MediLink? I asked. The telemedicine platform. Everyone uses MediLink, he whispered. I own 30% of it, I said. I funded the Series A round with the dividends you thought were pocket money. I am not just an heiress. Caleb, I am one of the most successful venture capitalists in this country. I hide behind the name Helix because I value my privacy, and because it allowed me to see who people really are when they think no one important is watching. I spread my arms, gesturing to the entire room, the building, the city beyond the window. You thought you were the shark, I asked softly. Caleb, you are a minnow. You are a parasite attached to the hull of a battleship. You have been living in my world, spending my money, breathing my air, and you had the audacity to look down on me. Sienna suddenly stood up. Her chair fell backward with a loud crash. I didn't know, she screamed. Her face streaked with mascara. She pointed a shaking finger at Caleb. He lied to me. He told me he was the genius. He told me the company was his. He made me sign those invoices. I didn't want to do it. He forced me. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. Ms. Northcott, please. I am a victim here. He is a manipulator. I just did what my boss told me to do. I can testify against him. I can tell you everything. Caleb looked at her, betrayed. Sienna, what are you doing? Shut up, she shrieked at him. You ruined my life. You said you were going to be a billionaire. You're nothing. You're a fraud. I watched them turn on each other. It was pathetic. It was predictable. Sit down, Miss Vance, I said. I do not need your testimony, but I can help you, she pleaded. I can prove he planned it all. I said sit down, I commanded. She collapsed back onto the edge of her chair, sobbing. I do not need your testimony because I have ears, I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. You see, when I cloned Caleb's phone to track his location, I also gained access to his voice memos. I pressed play. Sienna's voice filled the boardroom, loud and clear. It was from 3 months ago. The tone was not fearful or coerced. It was laughing, arrogant, and conspiratorial. Caleb, baby, listen, I figured out a way to hide the tax liability for the Cayman account. If we classify the transfer as a consulting loss, we can write it off, and then we can use the difference to put a down payment on that boat we saw. The authorities are too stupid to check the cross-border references. Do it. Just sign the paper. Coward. Do you want the yacht or not? The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Sienna looked at the table, unable to breathe. Her defense had just been incinerated. You were not forced. Sienna, I said. You were the architect of the tax evasion strategy. You are not a victim. You are a co-conspirator, and under federal law. That makes you liable for the same prison sentence as him. I closed the folder on the table. I have already sent this entire file to the district attorney, I said calmly. The charges are extensive: wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to commit corporate theft. My lawyers estimate that with the amount of money involved, over $12 million, you are both looking at a minimum mandatory sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. 20 years, Caleb whispered. The words hung in the air like smoke. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. He looked at the life he was about to lose. The suits, the watches, the reputation, the freedom. Then he broke. He didn't just cry. He crumbled. He slid out of his chair and fell to his knees on the marble floor. He crawled toward me, ignoring the gasps of the board members. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my white trousers. "Juliet," he sobbed, his voice high and thin. "Juliet, please, don't do this. I am begging you. We are married. 12 years. 12 years. Juliet, remember our wedding. Remember the vows, for better or for worse. Please, I made a mistake. I was weak. But I love you. I have always loved you. This thing with Sienna meant nothing. It was just stress. Please, baby, don't send me to prison. I will do anything. I will clean the floors. I will work for free. Just don't let them take me away." He pressed his face against my leg, weeping like a child. Sienna was wailing in her chair, rocking back and forth. The board members looked away, unable to watch the complete disintegration of a man who had walked in acting like a king. I looked down at the top of his head. I saw the expensive haircut. I smelled the expensive cologne. And I felt the wetness of his tears on my suit. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no love, no anger. Just the cold satisfaction of a calculation that had finally balanced out. "Get up, Caleb," I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the tomb-like room. "You are ruining my suit." I looked down at Caleb, who was still clutching the fabric of my white trousers like a drowning man holding onto a piece of driftwood. He was sobbing, a pathetic, wet sound that echoed in the silent boardroom. Behind him, Sienna was hyperventilating, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. A smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile a surgeon might wear before making an incision precise, necessary, and completely devoid of warmth. "Get up," I repeated, my voice soft but edged with steel. Caleb scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He looked at me with a glimmer of hope, his eyes darting to the phone in my hand, praying I wouldn't dial the authorities. You are not going to call them," he stammered. "Juliet, thank you. Thank you. I swear, I will make this right. We can go to counseling. We can—" "Stop," I said. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down, smoothing my jacket. "You misunderstand me. Caleb, I am not calling the police because prison is too easy for you." The room went quiet. Even the terrified board members leaned in. "Prison," I continued, examining my manicured fingernails. "Prison is a structure. You get 3 meals a day, you get a bed, you get a library, you get to work out in the yard. Sure, it is unpleasant, but it is passive. You sit there and you wait for time to pass. It is a vacation from responsibility. And frankly, I do not see why the American taxpayer should foot the bill for your room and board when you owe me $12 million. Caleb blinked. "Then, what you are firing me?" "Firing you." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "If I fire you, you walk out that door, you disappear. You probably find some other gullible company to charm, some other woman to leech off of. No, Caleb, you are not fired. You are retained." I picked up a document from my folder and slid it across the obsidian table toward him. "Congratulations," I said. "As of this moment, you have been reassigned. You are no longer the regional director. You are now the director of the Internal Crisis Management Unit." Caleb picked up the paper, his hands shaking. "Internal crisis. I don't know that department. Is that a strategic role?" For a second, his ego tried to inflate again. He thought I was giving him a second chance to prove his worth. Perhaps a difficult task to test his loyalty. "It is a very special department," I said. "It is located on sublevel 4. Caleb's face fell. "The basement, but that is the archives. That is where we keep the tax records from the 90s. "Precisely," I said. "It is a concrete bunker. There are no windows, there is no cell phone signal, and the climate control is permanently set to 60 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent the paper from rotting. It is cold, Caleb, very cold." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Your job description is simple. You are going to conduct a manual, forensic audit of every single transaction this company has made for the last 15 years. You are going to go through every receipt, every invoice, every expense report. You are going to trace every penny that you and your friends stole. You will find the money. Caleb, you will document it, and you will work until you have paid back the debt plus interest. But Caleb looked around the room, humiliated. That will take years. I can't work in the basement. I am an executive. You are an indentured servant, I corrected him, and you are not doing it alone. I turned my gaze to Sienna. She was wiping her face with a napkin, trying to regain some composure. Miss Vance, I said, you are also reassigned. You are now the probationary assistant to the director of the Internal Crisis Management Unit. Sienna's jaw dropped. Assistant to him. She pointed at Caleb with pure venom. I hate him. He ruined my life. I can't work for him. Oh, you will, I said pleasantly. You will fetch his files. You will organize his boxes. You will endure the fluorescent lights and the cold together. Consider it a couple's retreat. You wanted him so badly. Sienna, you wanted the man, the boss, the power. Now you have him, just the two of you, in a concrete box, for 8 hours a day, every day, until the debt is cleared. And if we refuse, Sienna challenged, her voice trembling, I can just walk out. I can quit. You can, I agreed, but the moment you step out of this building without my permission, the plea deal is off. My lawyers will send the evidence to the FBI, and I will personally ensure the judge sees the photos of your diplomatic shopping spree. So, you have a choice, the basement or the cell block. Which one has better lighting for your complexion? Sienna slumped back in her chair. Defeated, she looked at Caleb with a hatred so pure it could have peeled paint off the walls. Caleb refused to look at her. Now, I said, clapping my hands once, let us discuss logistics. Since you are working to pay off a debt, your salaries have been adjusted to the federal minimum wage. All your assets have been frozen to facilitate restitution. My assets, Caleb choked out. You can't freeze my personal accounts. I can when they are funded by stolen money, I said. And as for your living arrangements, give me your keys. I held out my hand. Keys? Caleb asked dumbly. The penthouse keys, I said. The apartment is leased by Vanguardia Global for executive use. Since you are no longer an executive, your lease is terminated effective immediately. Security is packing your personal effects clothing and toiletries only into boxes as we speak. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. But where will I live? Caleb whispered, panic rising in his chest. I have nowhere to go. I believe there is a Motel 6 in Queens that offers weekly rates, I suggested. It is quite affordable. And the car, I added. The Bentley. I pointed a remote at the window. The blinds retracted fully, revealing the street below. We were 40 stories up, but the view was clear. Down on the street, right in front of the main entrance, a large yellow tow truck was backing up to Caleb's silver Bentley. No, Caleb gasped, rushing to the window. No, that is my car. I customized the interior. It is the company's car, I said from my seat. And since the company is now under new management, we are liquidating unnecessary assets. It is being sold at auction tomorrow to cover a fraction of the legal fees I incurred while investigating you. We watched in silence as the tow truck hooked the gleaming silver car. The driver didn't care about the custom leather or the horsepower. He just yanked it up onto the flatbed. It looked small and toy-like from this height. Caleb pressed his hand against the glass, leaving a greasy smudge. He was watching his identity being towed away, without the suit, without the apartment, without the car. Who was he? He was just a middle-aged man with a bad moral compass and no savings. He turned back to me, his eyes hollow. You stripped me. You took everything. I took back what was mine, I said. There is a difference. I reached into my purse, a simple, elegant clutch, and pulled out 2 items. I tossed them onto the polished black table. They slid across the surface and stopped right in front of him. One was a plastic Metro card for the city bus system. The other was a single $50 bill. "Here," I said, "your signing bonus. That $50 is an advance on your first week's salary. It should cover a cab to the motel and a sandwich. I recommend you budget wisely. Caleb, payday isn't for another 2 weeks." He stared at the $50. It was an insult. It was less than he used to tip the valet Parker. He reached out and picked it up, his fingers trembling. It was the only money he had in the world now. "Elias," I said. The head of security stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am." "Escort Mr. Sterling and his assistant to their new office. Make sure they are settled in. And Elias, take their phones. No outside communication during work hours. We wouldn't want them distracted from their audit." "Understood," Elias said. He grabbed Caleb by the upper arm. It wasn't gentle. Another guard grabbed Sienna, who let out a sharp cry as she was hauled to her feet. "Move," Elias barked. The walk of shame began. They were marched out of the boardroom, past the stunned board members who watched with a mixture of horror and schadenfreude. Caleb walked with his head down, clutching the bus pass and the $50 like they were lifelines. Sienna stumbled in her high heels, the green dress now looking ridiculous and tragic. I stood up and followed them to the door, watching as they were paraded through the main office floor. The employees of Vanguardia, the ones Caleb had sneered at only an hour ago, were all standing at their desks. Word had spread. It always does. They knew. They watched in silence as the king of Wall Street was dragged toward the service elevator. Someone near the water cooler let out a low laugh. Then someone else whispered. "Finally." Caleb heard it. I saw his shoulders hunch. The humiliation was physical. It was heavier than any chain I could have put on him. Elias pressed the button for the elevator. The doors opened with a ding. This wasn't the private executive elevator lined with wood paneling. This was the freight elevator, scarred with scratches and smelling of industrial cleaner. Caleb turned back to look at me one last time before he stepped in. "Why?" he asked. It was a simple question. "Because you forgot who was holding the ladder while you climbed," I said. The doors slid shut, cutting off his face. I turned to Arthur, who was standing beside me, polishing his glasses. "Well," Arthur said, "that was dramatic. Do you think they will last a week down there?" "Sienna will quit in 3 days." I predicted. "She has no stamina. Caleb is too proud to quit. He thinks if he stays, he can charm me back. He thinks this is a test. He thinks he can work his way back up to the penthouse." I walked back to the head of the table and looked at the empty chair where Caleb had sat. "He doesn't realize that the ladder doesn't go up anymore," I said. "It only goes down." I checked my watch. It was 11 o'clock. "Arthur, call the legal team," I said, my voice shifting back to business. "We need to refile the quarterly earnings and get someone to clean this chair. It smells of fear and cheap ambition." I walked to the window and looked down at the city. The tow truck was gone. The street was busy. The world kept turning. Down in the basement, 60 feet below the pavement, the air was cold. The lights were humming with that headache-inducing buzz. Caleb and Sienna were currently staring at a mountain of boxes. Realizing that their hell was not fire and brimstone, it was paper cuts and silence. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 12 years, the air in my lungs felt clean. But I wasn't done. The basement was just the holding cell. The real punishment was about to begin. Because while they were down there looking for pennies, I was going to be up here, dismantling the very thing that Caleb loved more than money, more than Sienna, even more than himself. I was going to dismantle his reputation. I turned back to the room. The board members were still sitting there, terrified, waiting for my next command. "Gentlemen," I said, smiling that cold razor-blade smile again. "And ladies, now that the distractions are gone, let us talk about the future, and by the future, I mean my company." The transformation of Caleb Sterling from a master of the universe to a basement dweller had taken exactly 60 minutes. It was a record, even for me. But as I sat down in the CEO's chair, My chair, I knew that the 61st minute was going to be the hardest of his life, because that was the minute he would have to look at Sienna, in the cold fluorescent light, and realize that she wasn't a prize, she was just another prisoner. I sat in my penthouse, wrapped in a cashmere robe, sipping tea that cost $50 an ounce. The city lights of New York glittered below me, a tapestry of ambition and success. But the only screen I cared about was the iPad resting on my knees. It displayed a live, high-definition feed of Sub-Level 4. It had been 30 days. 30 days since Caleb Sterling fell from the sky. The camera feed showed a room that looked less like an office and more like a tomb for dead dreams. The walls were unpainted concrete. The lighting was that soul-crushing fluorescent hum that turned skin a sickly yellow. And in the center of this purgatory sat two figures hunched over metal desks that I had salvaged from a bankrupt DMV in New Jersey. Caleb looked awful. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by a gray polyester jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. It had the company logo stamped on the back, Vanguardia Crisis Management. His hair, once his pride and joy, was limp and greasy. He had stopped shaving every day, and a patchy, gray stubble covered his jaw. He looked 10 years older. He was squinting at a stack of invoices, muttering to himself, looking like a madman decoding a conspiracy. And Sienna was a masterpiece of disintegration. The emerald dress was a distant memory. She wore the same gray jumpsuit, but she had tried to tailor it with staples, which had only made it rip at the seams. Her face was bare of makeup, without the contouring and the false lashes. She looked ordinary. Angry, tired, and very ordinary. I turned up the volume on the iPad. "You missed a decimal point," Sienna snapped. Her voice was scratchy, stripped of the purring seduction she used to employ. "This invoice is for 4,000, not 40,000. Can't you even do basic math anymore?" "Genius." Caleb slammed his hand on the desk. Dust motes danced in the stale air. "Do not talk to me about math, you leech. If it weren't for your constant whining about needing that trip to Paris, we wouldn't be looking for this receipt. Do you remember the foie gras? Do you?" "Because I am currently logging it as office supplies, and I don't think Juliet is going to buy that." "Don't say her name," Sienna shrieked. Throwing a stapler at him, it missed and hit a pile of boxes labeled 2018 tax evasion. "Every time you say her name, that printer turns on as if on cue. The dot matrix printer in the corner, a relic from the 80s that I had specifically installed for its noise, whirred to life. It spat out a single sheet of paper, Sienna groaned, putting her head on the desk. "Oh God, not another one!" Caleb walked over and ripped the paper out. He read it aloud, his voice dripping with misery. "Clarification request 402, regarding the dinner at Le Bernardin on October 12th. The expense report lists client acquisition. However, the receipt shows 2 orders of the chef's tasting menu and a bottle of 1996 Dom Perignon. Please submit a 500-word essay detailing exactly which client was acquired, or if the client was, in fact, Miss Vance's ego, due by 5 p.m. Management." Caleb crumbled the paper into a ball and threw it on the floor. "She is mocking us," he whispered. "She is sitting up there in my apartment, drinking my wine, and she is watching us. I know she is." "It is not your apartment," Sienna yelled. "It was never your apartment. You were a fraud." Caleb. Broke, lying fraud. I could have married a hedge fund manager. I could have been in Miami right now. Instead, I am in a basement in Queens sorting through your garbage. "You were happy enough to spend the fraud money," Caleb shouted back, his face turning red. "You didn't ask where the Cartier watch came from, did you? You just put it on and took a selfie? You are a gold digger who dug in the wrong backyard." I sipped my tea, savoring the bitterness. It was better than Netflix. Their relationship had decomposed faster than a banana in the sun, without the money, the luxury hotels, and the thrill of secrecy. There was nothing left but resentment. They hated each other. Every glance was an accusation. Every breath was an annoyance. Caleb slumped back into his chair. I can't do this anymore. The bus ride. Juliet makes me take the M15 bus. Do you know what happens on the M15 at 6 in the morning? A man threw a half-eaten burrito at me yesterday. At me, Caleb Sterling. You deserve it, Sienna muttered. At least you have a room. I'm sleeping on my sister's couch in Jersey City. She makes me pay rent. With what? Caleb. With the $50 a week Juliet gives us. Caleb's eyes shifted. He looked at the camera in the corner of the room. It was a dummy camera, a blinking red light that did nothing. He stared right at it, then looked away, thinking he was being subtle. He didn't know the real camera was a pinhole lens hidden in the smoke detector above his head. I have a plan, he whispered, leaning across the aisle toward Sienna. Sienna rolled her eyes. Oh, great. Another plan. Like the plan to buy the company or the plan to hide the money. Your plans suck. Caleb. Shut up and listen, he hissed. I met someone. Online. I went to the library on my lunch break. I found a forum on the dark web. There's a guy. His handle is Viper. He buys corporate secrets. High-level stuff. Mergers. Acquisition targets. Client lists. Sienna sat up. Her interest piqued by the smell of treachery. So we don't have secrets anymore. We are in the basement. We are in the archives, Caleb corrected, a frantic gleam in his eye. Look around you, Sienna. This isn't just trash. These boxes that shelf over there. That is the historical data for the entire Northcott Trust. It lists every shell company Juliet's family ever used. It lists the social security numbers of her board members. It has the original algorithms for Helix Capital. He pulled a small, black USB drive from his sock. I am going to copy it, he said. Tonight, Viper offered me $5 million for the raw data. $5 million? Sienna? Cash? Crypto? Untraceable. Sienna looked at the USB drive. I could see the greed fighting with the fear on her face. Greed won. It always won with her. $5 million, she whispered. That is 2.5 each. Exactly, Caleb said. We copy the drive. We meet him tomorrow night at the old shipyard in Brooklyn. We make the exchange. And then we run. Mexico. Thailand. Anywhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty. But Juliet. Sienna glanced at the ceiling. Juliet thinks she broke me. Caleb sneered. It was the old Caleb resurfacing, the arrogant gambler. She thinks I am just a dog learning to heel. She doesn't know I still have teeth. We strike tonight. Sienna, this is our ticket out of hell. I watched them on the screen. I watched them high-five. A pathetic, conspiratorial gesture. I set my teacup down on the saucer. Oh, Caleb, I said to the empty penthouse. You really should check the source code before you install the malware. He thought he had found Viper on a dark web forum. He didn't know that I owned the forum. He didn't know that Viper was an AI chatbot I had programmed myself, designed to bait corporate spies. And he certainly didn't know that the historical data in those boxes in the basement wasn't the Northcott Trust records. It was a honeypot. I had planted those files 3 days ago. They looked real. They smelled real. But the moment anyone tried to upload them to an external server, they triggered a silent alarm that notified not just me, but the FBI's Cybercrimes Division. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Elias. Yes, Ms. Northcott. His voice came through instantly. The mice have taken the cheese, I said. They are going to try to copy the files tonight. Let them do it. Let them feel smart for a few hours. I want them to have hope. I want them to taste the freedom. Understood, Elias said. And the meeting with Viper. Proceed as planned, I said. Prepare the warehouse. And Elias, make sure the lighting is dramatic. I want Caleb to see exactly who he is selling to. I hung up. On the screen, Caleb was plugging the USB drive into the ancient computer tower. He was sweating. He looked over his shoulder, checking the door. The progress bar on the screen moved slowly. 10%, 20%. Come on, he muttered. Is it working? Sienna asked, biting her nails. It is copying. Caleb grinned, a rictus of triumph. We are going to be rich, babe. We are going to burn this whole company to the ground. I watched him copy gigabytes of useless, tagged data. I watched him seal his own fate. He wasn't just an embezzler anymore. Now, he was a corporate spy. The mandatory minimum sentence just went from 10 years to 25. I closed the iPad cover. The screen went black. Sleep tight. Caleb, I whispered. Tomorrow is a big day. The rain was falling in sheets over the Brooklyn Navy Yard. A relentless, freezing downpour that turned the world into a blur of gray and black. It was the kind of weather that washed away sins. Or at least, that was what the poet said. I knew better. This rain wasn't washing anything away. It was simply setting the stage for a drowning. I was standing on the rusted iron catwalk, 30 feet above the concrete floor of abandoned Warehouse 4. The shadows here were thick and heavy, perfect for concealing a woman wearing a black trench coat and watching the final act of a play she had written herself. Below me, the vast, empty space was illuminated by a single, flickering halogen bulb hanging from a chain. It cast a sickly yellow pool of light in the center of the darkness. Elias was already down there. He was leaning against a stack of rotting wooden pallets, wearing a leather jacket and dark sunglasses, despite the gloom. He looked every inch the part of Viper, the mysterious information broker from the dark web. He checked his watch, a cheap digital thing I had bought him for $5 to replace his Rolex for the night, and then looked up at me. He gave a barely perceptible nod. They were here. The heavy metal sliding door at the far end of the warehouse groaned open, the sound of metal grinding on metal echoing like a scream. Two figures stepped out of the rain and into the dry, dusty air of the trap. Caleb and Sienna looked like wet rats. Their gray jumpsuits were soaked through, clinging to their bodies. Caleb was clutching a plastic bag against his chest, as if it contained the crown jewels. Sienna was shivering, her teeth chattering, but her eyes were darting around the room with a feral intensity. I adjusted the earpiece in my right ear. The directional microphones hidden in the rafters picked up their whispers with crystal clarity. "I don't like this," Sienna hissed, wiping water from her eyes. "It is too quiet. Are you sure this is the place?" "Stop whining," Caleb snapped. He sounded breathless, his heart rate likely hammering against his ribs. The coordinates were encrypted. Of course it is quiet. That is how these people operate. This is the big leagues. Sienna, this isn't selling fake purses on eBay. "Remember the deal," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him to a stop just outside the circle of light. 50-50? I want my half transferred to my crypto wallet immediately. If you try to screw me over, Caleb, I swear to God I will scream. "You will get your half," Caleb said, shaking him off. $2.5 million. Just shut up and let me do the talking. You look desperate. Vipers smell fear. "I am desperate," she whispered aggressively. "We are living in a motel that smells like bleach and regret. Just give him the drive and let's go." They stepped into the light. Caleb straightened his spine. For a moment, I saw a flash of the old Caleb, the man who used to stride into boardrooms and command attention. He ran a hand through his wet, greasy hair and tried to put on a smile. It was a grotesque expression, a mixture of terror and arrogance that made him look unhinged. "Viper!" Caleb called out, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. Elias pushed himself off the pallets. He walked slowly into the light, his boots crunching on the gravel and broken glass. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stood there, arms crossed, looking dangerous. "I am Sterling," Caleb said, stepping forward. "We chatted on the forum. Secure_channel_8. Elias nodded slowly. He held up a hand, rubbing his thumb and forefinger together, the universal sign for payment. "Right," Caleb said, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "Business first. I like that. I have the merchandise." He pulled the black USB drive out of the plastic bag. He held it up, the small piece of metal catching the dim light. "The complete historical data of the Northcott Trust," Caleb announced, his voice trembling with pride. shell companies, offshore accounts, social security numbers of the entire board, and the source code for the Helix acquisition algorithm. It is all here. This drive is worth billions to the right buyer, but for you, $5 million. Elias stared at the drive behind his sunglasses. He reached down and picked up a heavy silver metal briefcase that was sitting by his feet. He placed it on a rusted oil drum that served as a makeshift table between them. The sound of the briefcase hitting the metal drum was heavy, solid, the sound of money. Sienna let out a small, hungry noise. She took a step forward, her eyes glued to the case. "Show me the money," Caleb said, trying to sound tough. Elias shook his head. He pointed to the drive. "Give me the drive first." "No way," Caleb said. "I know how this works. You show me the cash, then I give you the drive." Elias paused. Then, with a shrug of indifference, he spun the briefcase around. He unlatched the two locks with a loud click, click. He lifted the lid just an inch, enough for Caleb and Sienna to peer inside. From my vantage point, I couldn't see inside, but I didn't need to. I knew what was in there, but Caleb and Sienna saw exactly what they wanted to see. They saw stacks of green paper. They saw freedom. "Oh my God," Sienna whispered. "It is real." "Close it," Caleb said quickly, looking around as if he expected ghosts to snatch it. Okay, here." He tossed the USB drive to Elias. Elias caught it in midair with one hand. He inspected it, turning it over. Then he slipped it into his leather jacket pocket. He pushed the briefcase toward Caleb. "Pleasure doing business with you," Elias said. His voice was gravelly, disguised. Caleb grabbed the handle of the briefcase. He pulled it off the drum, clutching it with both hands. The weight of it seemed to anchor him to the earth. He looked at Sienna, and then he threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had cheated death. It was manic, loud, and echoing. "I did it," he screamed at the ceiling, at the rain, at me. "I won. Do you hear me? Juliet, I won. You thought you could bury me in the basement. You thought you could break me. I am Caleb Sterling. I am a survivor. I just sold your entire empire for $5 million and you didn't even see it coming." He turned to Sienna, his eyes wide and wild. "We are rich, baby. We are out of here. First class to Rio Champagne. No more buses. No more invoices." "Open it," Sienna shrieked, jumping up and down. "Give me my share. I want to hold it." Yes, Caleb yelled. He dropped to his knees on the dirty concrete floor. He placed the case flat. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely work the latches. "Look at it. Sienna, look at the color of victory." He threw the lid open. The laughter died in his throat instantly. It was as if someone had cut his vocal cords. Sienna froze. They stared into the briefcase. It was full of paper. Stacks and stacks of paper, cut to the size of banknotes. But they were not green. They were white, and they were not money. Caleb reached in and picked up the top bundle. He stared at the text printed on the paper. United States District Court. Warrant for arrest. Defendant Caleb Sterling. Charge economic espionage. Theft of trade secrets. He picked up another bundle. Defendant Sienna Vance. Charge conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Industrial sabotage. "What?" Caleb whispered. "What is this?" He frantically dug through the case, throwing bundles of paper over his shoulder, desperate to find the money hidden underneath. "Where is the money? Where is the cash? This is just paper. It is all paper." "It is over." "Caleb," a voice boomed from the darkness. Caleb spun around. "Who said that?" he screamed. "Viper, you ripped me off. Give me the money." Clack. A bank of high-powered stadium floodlights mounted on the ceiling suddenly roared to life. The warehouse was instantly flooded with blinding white light, brighter than the sun. Caleb and Sienna screamed, shielding their eyes, stumbling back. "Turn it off," Sienna yelled. Slowly, their eyes adjusted, and then they saw him. Viper took off his sunglasses. He took off the leather jacket, revealing the tactical vest underneath with the Vanguardia security insignia. "Elias," Caleb breathed. "No, No, no, no. Good evening, Mr. Sterling, Elias said in his normal, deep voice. Miss Northcott sends her regards. Then, I began to descend the metal staircase from the catwalk. The heels of my boots rang out against the iron steps. Clang, clang, clang. Caleb looked up. He saw me coming down, dressed in black, dry and calm amidst the chaos. Juliet, he whispered. He looked at the briefcase full of warrants, then at Elias, then back at me. You set this up. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked into the circle of light. I stopped 5 feet away from him. Did you really think, I asked, my voice calm and conversational, that I would leave the master files of $1 billion trust fund in a cardboard box in the basement, next to the cleaning supplies? Caleb pushed himself up, his face pale as death. But the files, I checked them, the names, the accounts, they were real. They were honeypots, I said. Dummy files generated by an AI. They looked real enough to fool a desperate man with an ego larger than his IQ, but they were tagged. Caleb, digital isotopes. The moment you copied them to that USB drive, you didn't just steal data, you triggered a silent alarm that went directly to the FBI. I walked over to the oil drum and picked up one of the warrants from the briefcase. You see, I explained, embezzlement is a state crime. It carries a sentence of 5 to 10 years, and you get out in 3 for good behavior. I did not want that for you. That felt insufficient. I took a step closer. So I gave you a promotion. By stealing what you thought were trade secrets and attempting to sell them to a foreign entity because, yes, the Viper persona was flagged as an international broker, you have upgraded your crime. This is no longer simple theft. This is economic espionage under the Espionage Act of 1996. I smiled. The mandatory minimum for that is 15 years. And since you conspired with Miss Vance, and you attempted to sell the data for $5 million, the judge is going to look at 20 years. 20 years in a maximum security federal facility. No golf courses, no library, just hard time. Caleb fell back as if I had punched him. You baited me. This is entrapment. It is not entrapment, I corrected him. I provided the opportunity. You provided the intent. I didn't force you to copy that drive. I didn't force you to come here. I just left the door open, and you walked right through it because you are greedy. I looked at Sienna. She was staring at the pile of warrants, her mouth moving soundlessly. And you, Miss Vance? I said. You demanded 50%. Didn't you? 50% of the profit means 50% of the culpability. You are an accessory to espionage. Enjoy your 20s and 30s behind bars. I hear orange is very in this season. Sienna looked up. Her eyes were not looking at me. They were looking at Caleb. The realization hit her like a physical blow. There was no money. There was no escape. There was only prison. And it was all because of the man standing next to her. The man who had promised her the world and delivered her into hell. You, she whispered. Caleb looked at her, confused. Sienna, wait, we can fix this. We can... You idiot, she screamed. It was a primal sound. Sienna launched herself at him. She didn't slap him. She tackled him. Her nails, even without the expensive manicure, were sharp. She went for his face. You lied to me, she shrieked, clawing at his cheeks. You said we were rich. You said you had a plan. You destroyed my life. Caleb fell backward onto the concrete, screaming as Sienna rained blows down on him. Get off me! Get off, you crazy witch! I hate you! She screamed, sobbing and hitting him with the plastic bag, with her fists, with anything she could reach. I wish I had never met you. I hope you die in jail. I watched them rolling in the dirt, fighting like animals in a pit, the former regional director and the former marketing queen, now just 2 desperate criminals tearing each other apart in a wet warehouse. Elias stepped forward to separate them, but I held up a hand. Wait, I said softly. Let them have this moment. It is the last thing they will ever share. I watched for another 10 seconds as Sienna managed to rip Caleb's jumpsuit, exposing his pale, sweating skin. Caleb shoved her hard, sending her sprawling into a puddle, but she scrambled back up, spitting fury. "That is enough," I said finally. Elias moved. He grabbed Sienna by the back of her jumpsuit and hauled her off Caleb. She was kicking and screaming, her face streaked with mud and tears. Another guard stepped out of the shadows and pinned Caleb to the ground. Caleb looked up at me from the floor. His face was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek. He looked broken, truly, utterly broken. "Why, he croaked. "You could have just fired me. Why did you have to destroy me?" I looked down at him, my expression impassive. "Because, Caleb," I said, "you tried to sell my life. You tried to sell my grandmother's legacy. You tried to sell me. You treated my existence as a commodity to be traded for your comfort. I didn't destroy you. I simply let you appraise your own value. And it turns out, you are worth nothing." I turned my back on him. "Elias," I said, "call the authorities. Tell them we have caught the intruders, and hand over the recording of this transaction. I want the jury to hear exactly how much he laughed when he thought he had won." "Yes, ma'am." I walked toward the door, the sound of the rain outside calling to me, behind me. The sound of Caleb's weeping was drowned out by the wail of approaching sirens. The trap was sprung, the rats were caught, and the exterminator was going home to sleep in a warm bed. The sirens were distant at first, a low wail cutting through the sound of the rain hammering against the corrugated metal roof. They were coming, but we had time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. In the theater of revenge, the silence before the final curtain is always the most important act. I signaled Elias to step back. He released his grip on Caleb but stayed close enough to intervene if necessary. Caleb didn't move to run. He just slumped against the rusted oil drum, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirty concrete floor, his legs splayed out in front of him. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Blood from the scratch on his cheek mixed with the sweat and rain on his face. Sienna was huddled a few feet away, sobbing quietly into her hands. But I ignored her for the moment. My focus was on the man I had shared a bed with for 12 years. 5 minutes, I said, my voice cutting through the damp air. "The police will be here in 5 minutes. If you have anything to say, Caleb, now is the time, not as a defendant, but as a husband." Caleb looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. The arrogance was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was a deep, confusing pain. "Why?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked in the elevator. But this time, it wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine plea for understanding. "Juliet, why this? Why the trap you won? You took the company. You took the house. You have billions. Why did you have to dangle this? This hope in front of me just to crush it? Why destroy me so completely?" He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I know I cheated. I know I stole. But this is cruel. It is sadistic. I didn't know you had this kind of darkness in you." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of emotion. It wasn't pity. It was a profound, aching exhaustion. "Cruel." I repeated the word, tasting it. "You think this is cruel because I let you see the consequences of your actions? No. Caleb, cruelty is what you did to me for a decade." I took a step closer, my boots avoiding the puddles. "Cruelty is coming home every night to a wife you considered an idiot," I said, my voice trembling slightly with the weight of the memory. "Cruelty is looking me in the eye over dinner, asking me how my little garden was, while you were texting your mistress under the table. Cruelty is making me feel small, day after day, year after year, just so you could feel big." I didn't mean to make you feel small," Caleb whispered. I wanted to be the man. I wanted to take care of you." "You didn't want to take care of me," I corrected him gently. "You wanted to own me. You fell in love with a version of me that didn't exist. You loved the quiet Juliet, the simple Juliet, The Juliet who needed you to explain how a credit card worked. But that woman was a performance. Caleb, a performance I kept up because I foolishly thought that if I let you shine, if I stepped back and let you be the king, you would love me for it. I laughed. A sad, broken sound. But you didn't love me. You loved the shadow. And the moment the shadow had a thought of its own, you went out and found a brighter, younger ornament to replace it. That is not true, Caleb protested weakly. I loved you. You loved the convenience of me, I said. Do you know what I was doing those nights you were working late with Sienna? I wasn't sleeping. I was up until 4 a.m, trading on the Tokyo Exchange. I was coding the back end for Streamline. I was building an empire in the dark. Caleb, because I didn't want my success to emasculate you, I dimmed my own light to keep you from being blinded, and you repaid that sacrifice by stealing the very money I was using to build our future. Caleb stared at me. The realization was washing over him. Wave after wave, he was looking at me, really looking at me, and seeing the stranger he had lived with. He saw the intelligence in my eyes, the steel in my spine, the sheer magnitude of the person he had underestimated. I could have been your partner, I whispered, the sadness finally bleeding into my voice. We could have ruled this city together. I would have given you the world. Caleb, I would have put your name on buildings. All you had to do was be honest. All you had to do was respect me. But you were too busy trying to be a big man to notice you were standing next to a giant. Caleb closed his eyes. Tears leaked out, mixing with the grime on his face. I didn't know, he choked out. I swear to God, Juliet, I didn't know who you were. That, I said, is your greatest crime. Not the fraud, not the adultery, but the fact that you looked at me every day for 12 years and saw nothing. You are not a rabbit, he whispered, opening his eyes. I thought you were a rabbit, but you are a wolf. I am neither, I said. I am just a woman who got tired of being eaten. Suddenly, a movement from the side caught my attention. Sienna scrambled to her knees. She looked wild, her hair plastered to her skull, her eyes wide with panic. The sirens were louder now, just a few blocks away. The blue and red lights were starting to flash against the high windows of the warehouse. I can help you, Sienna screamed, crawling toward me. She didn't look at Caleb. She looked only at me, at the power I held. Ms. Northcott, Juliet, please, I know more. He has other accounts. I know where he hid the diamonds. Caleb turned his head slowly to look at her. Sienna. Shut up, she yelled at him, then turned back to me, desperate, speaking so fast the words tripped over each other. He bought loose diamonds last year. He didn't trust the banks. He put them in a safety deposit box in Jersey, under his mother's maiden name. I have the key code. I saw him type it. It is 8429. And he has a crypto wallet on a hard drive taped behind the toilet in the master bathroom of the penthouse. I can show you. I can give you everything. Just don't let them take me. Sienna, stop, Caleb moaned, the final betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. Please, just stop. You dragged me into this, she spat at him. I am not going to jail for you. I am going to tell them everything I will tell them about the bribes to the Port Authority. I will tell them about the fake invoices for the senator. I will bury you. Caleb, I will bury you to save myself. I watched her, this woman who had once walked into my husband's office like she owned the place. Now, she was selling him out for a chance at a plea bargain that didn't exist. Sienna, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. She froze, looking up at me with hopeful, terrified eyes. Yes, yes. Did you hear me? I am helping you. I looked down at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. You are not helping me, I said. You are just confirming what I already knew. I found the diamonds 2 months ago. I replaced them with cubic zirconia. And the crypto wallet, I drained that before I even walked into the boardroom this morning. Sienna's mouth fell open. But thank you, I said coldly. Your willingness to betray him so quickly, it validates everything I thought about you. You are not a victim. Sienna. You are just a parasite looking for a new host. But I am afraid this host is closed for business. You, she whimpered. You are a monster. I am a CEO, I corrected her. And I am closing the ledger. The warehouse doors burst open. Blue and red light flooded the space, blinding and chaotic. The sound of tires screeching on concrete echoed off the walls. Men in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back poured out of the vehicles, guns drawn. Federal agents dropped to the ground hands where we can see them. The shout was deafening. Caleb didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't try to run. He just sat there, looking at me. The chaos of the raid was happening around us. Elias stepping back with his hands raised calmly. Sienna screaming and throwing herself flat on the floor. But Caleb's eyes never left mine. In that final second, before the agents swarmed him, I saw it. I saw the realization of what he had truly lost. He wasn't mourning the money. He wasn't mourning the freedom. He was looking at me with a devastating clarity. He realized that I was the most formidable thing he had ever encountered, and he had thrown me away for a cheap thrill. Juliet, he mouthed. The sound was lost in the noise of the raid, but I read his lips. I'm sorry. I stood still, the trench coat shielding me from the wind and the lights. I watched as two agents grabbed him, hauling him up from the dirt. They slammed him against the rusted oil drum, twisting his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the final period at the end of our marriage. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I owed him that much. I owed him the respect of watching him fall, the respect he had never given me while he was rising, as they dragged him toward the waiting cars. He twisted his head back one last time, but I had already turned away. The play was over. The curtain had fallen, and I had a company to run. The chaos of the raid settled into a rhythmic, bureaucratic procedure that was almost soothing to watch. The FBI agents moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, the kind of efficiency Caleb had always claimed to value but never actually possessed. I stood near the open bay doors of the warehouse, watching the rain slant through the floodlights. The air smelled of wet concrete, exhaust fumes, and the metallic tang of justice. Two agents marched Caleb past me. The transformation was complete. 12 hours ago, he had been a man who thought he owned the world. He had walked with a swagger, confident in his ability to charm or cheat his way out of any problem. Now, he was a ruin. The gray jumpsuit was torn at the shoulder where Sienna had clawed him. His face was streaked with mud and blood. His hands, usually manicured and expressive, were locked behind his back in steel cuffs. He walked with a shuffle, his head hanging low, his spine curved under the weight of a reality he could no longer deny. He looked small. That was the most shocking part. Without the expensive suit, without the elevated office chair, without the borrowed power of my money, Caleb Sterling was a small, unremarkable man. Sienna followed a few feet behind him, flanked by a female agent. She had stopped screaming. The fight had drained out of her, leaving only a hollow, trembling shell. She didn't look at me. She stared at her bare feet, shivering violently in the cold night air. The emerald dress, the trips to Paris, the diamonds, they were all gone. She was just a girl in a dirty jumpsuit facing 20 years in a cage. A senior agent walked over to me. He held a clipboard covered in a plastic sheet to protect it from the rain. "Ms. Northcott," he said, his voice respectful. "We have secured the suspects and the evidence. The recording from your security chief confirmed the intent to sell classified trade secrets. It is an open and shut case." He held out a pen. "I just need your signature on the transfer of custody for the recovered drives, acknowledging that you have verified the data was false." I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I looked at the line at the bottom of the page. It asked for the signature of the victim. I signed my name with a flourish. Juliet Northcott, not Mrs. Sterling, not Caleb's wife, just Juliet Northcott, CEO of Helix Capital and Vanguardia Global. "Thank you, Agent," I said, handing the clipboard back. "I trust the prosecution will be vigorous." with the amount of money involved and the international implications of the buyer profile. The district attorney is going to throw the book at them. The agent promised. They won't be seeing daylight for a very long time. I nodded. Good. The agents began to load them into the back of the armored transport van. It wasn't a sleek police cruiser. It was a heavy, ugly truck with barred windows, designed for transporting high-risk prisoners. Just before they pushed him into the dark interior, Caleb stopped. He planted his feet, resisting the agents for a brief second. He turned his head. Juliet. His voice was cracked, raw from the screaming and the crying. The agents paused, looking at me for a signal. I nodded once, giving him permission to speak. Caleb looked at me across the 20 feet of wet pavement that separated us. The rain was matting his hair to his forehead. He looked like a man waking up from a long, terrible dream, only to realize the waking world was the nightmare. Juliet, he said again, softer this time. His eyes searched mine, looking for a trace of the woman who used to make him coffee, the woman who used to smooth his hair before a big meeting. I am sorry. I really am. I lost my way. I lost you. I am so sorry. It was a genuine apology. I could hear it. For the first time in his life, Caleb Sterling was not trying to manipulate a situation. He was simply expressing regret. I looked at him. I felt the weight of 12 years. I felt the memories of our wedding day, the days in the garden, the nights I spent working while he slept. I felt all of it, and then I felt it slide away, like water off the slick surface of my trench coat. I reached up and adjusted the cuff of my black sleeve, brushing away a speck of imaginary dust. Your apology has been declined, Caleb, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the sound of the idling engines. Just like your credit card, Caleb flinched as if I had slapped him. He opened his mouth to say something else, perhaps to beg, perhaps to say goodbye. But the moment had passed. The agents pushed him forward. He stumbled into the dark belly of the van. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, with a sound of finality that rang in my ears like a church bell. Bang! Sienna was loaded into a separate vehicle. She didn't look back. I stood there and watched as the convoy pulled away. The red taillights reflected on the wet asphalt, stretching out like bloody streaks before disappearing into the gloom of the Brooklyn night. Silence returned to the warehouse district. The rain began to lighten, turning into a fine, cold mist. Ms. Northcott? Arthur Penhaligon appeared at my elbow. He was holding a large black umbrella, holding it high to shield me, even though I was already wearing a coat. The silver Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting a few yards away, its engine purring softly, a stark contrast to the prison van that had just left. Are you all right? Arthur asked gently. He looked at me with the concern of a man who had known me since I was a child. He expected tears. He expected a collapse. He was ready to catch me. I turned to him. My face was dry. My pulse was steady. I am perfectly fine. Arthur, I said. In fact, I have not felt this clear-headed in a decade. Arthur studied my face. Then a small, proud smile touched his lips. The car is ready to take you home. I assumed you would want to go to the estate in Connecticut to rest. It has been a long 48 hours. I looked at the car. Then I looked at the watch on my wrist, a platinum timepiece I had bought for myself to celebrate my first million. Years ago. What time is it in Tokyo, Arthur? I asked. Arthur blinked, surprised by the question. Tokyo. It is. Nearly opening bell. 9 in the morning there. Exactly, I said, walking toward the car. The Asian markets are reacting to the news of the Vanguardia acquisition. I need to be there to stabilize the stock price. If I let the rumors of the arrest spread without a statement, we could lose 5% by noon. Arthur hurried to open the rear door for me. You want to go to the office now? No, I said, sliding onto the cream leather seat. Take me to the stock exchange. I have arranged a video conference with the major shareholders. We have a lot of work to do. We need to rebrand. We need to purge the rest of Caleb's incompetent hires, and I have a new algorithm I want to deploy for the logistics division." Arthur closed the door and settled into the passenger seat next to the driver. "To the exchange," he instructed the driver, as the car glided forward, moving smoothly through the potholed streets of the industrial park and turning toward the glittering skyline of Manhattan. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to husband. There was no hesitation. My thumb hovered over the name for a fraction of a second, not out of sentiment, but out of a desire to savor the act. I pressed delete. Contact deleted. The name vanished. The number vanished. It was as if he had never existed. I dialed a new number. It was late, but the man I was calling never slept. "This is Sterling. Sorry. This is Northcott Residence. Main line." The voice answered. It was the architect who had renovated my summer house. "Mr. Dravos," I said. "It is Juliet Northcott. Miss Northcott. It is 3 a.m, he said, sounding groggy. "I know," I said. "I have a job for you. I want you to go to the penthouse at the Millennium Tower tomorrow morning. I want it gutted." "Gutted?" he asked, waking up instantly. "But we just renovated the kitchen last year. The marble." "Tear it all out," I commanded, looking out the window as the Brooklyn Bridge loomed above us, a cathedral of steel cables against the night sky. The marble, the walls, the floors, everything that man touched. I want it gone. Strip it down to the studs. "And what should we build in its place?" he asked. "A gym, a nursery, a library," I said. "A massive, 2-story library, floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, leather armchairs, silence. I want a place where I can read my balance sheets in peace and install a new security system, one that detects rats before they get in." "Understood. Ms. Northcott," he said. "I will have a crew there at 8. "Make it 7, I said, and hung up. I lowered the phone and leaned back against the headrest. The city of New York was speeding past my window. The lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. I saw the office towers where thousands of people were working, striving, fighting to climb ladders that led nowhere. I saw the restaurants where deals were made and marriages were broken. I was alone in the back of the car. The seat beside me was empty. For 12 years, I had tried to fill that empty space with a man who was too small for the room. I had tried to shrink myself to fit into his world. I had tried to be the gardener, the wife, the background character, but the background character had just bought the studio. I caught my reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back at me was not tired. She was not broken. She was sharp, angular, and terrifyingly awake. The diamond choker at my throat glittered like a collar. But I wasn't the one wearing a leash anymore. I took a deep breath. The air in the car smelled of leather and expensive solitude. It was the sweetest smell I had ever known. Caleb was heading to a cell where his world would shrink to 6 feet by 8 feet. He would have 20 years to think about the decimals he missed and the woman he underestimated. I, on the other hand, had a market to conquer. "Arthur," I called out. "Yes, Madam Chairwoman." "Turn up the music," I said, watching the lights of the financial district grow closer, rising like mountains of glass to meet me. "And call the Tokyo desk. Tell them the Queen is coming online." The car sped into the tunnel. Emerging seconds later into the blinding, beautiful heart of the city, I was alone. I was single. And for the first time in my entire life, I was completely, absolutely free. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate corporate takedown. I hope you enjoyed watching Juliet reclaim her throne as much as I enjoyed writing it. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from right now? Are you in your car, at work, or relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments below so we can share our thoughts and connect with each other. If you enjoyed this story, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button for the Crimson Drama Stories channel. Don't forget to like this video and smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who love a good revenge drama. Your support means the world to me, and helps me create more stories like this one. See you in the next video.